Let's call this episode 9 in Civics Questions Worth Asking, because civics is not just memorizing the three branches of government. It's actually learning how power works and how rights are protected and how decisions get made and what responsibilities come with living in a republic. I'm Matt Hasquin, a high school history teacher, government teacher, civics teacher at a small rural public high school in south central Illinois, and I'm just sharing things that I think are important, especially civics questions that I believe are worth asking. And today's question, or tonight's question, or this episode's question, is that what happens when people lose trust in the government? Now, trust, of course, is a complicated word when it comes to civics, because a free people should not blindly trust the government. The American system was not built on the idea that people in power should simply be trusted to do the right thing. That's why we have elections. And that's also why we have things like checks and balances, separation of powers. That's why we have the Bill of Rights, for crying out loud. And it's also why we have courts and public records and a free press and peaceful protest and the ability to criticize leaders, right? That's part of the First Amendment. And so the Constitution assumes that power needs limits. So when we talk about trust in government, we don't mean, blind faith. Citizens should question the government. Citizens should demand accountability, and they should challenge corruption and incompetence and secrecy and dishonesty and abuse of power, because healthy skepticism is not the enemy of self-government. In many ways, healthy skepticism is necessary. But there's a difference between healthy skepticism and total cynicism. Healthy skepticism says, show me the evidence. Total cynicism says, nothing can be trusted. Because healthy skepticism will go on to ask questions, and total cynicism assumes the answer before the question is even asked. Healthy skepticism wants government to be accountable. Total cynicism decides that accountability is impossible. And the difference in those scenarios matters a great deal. Because when people lose all trust in government, several things can happen. First of all, you get a decline in participation. People stop voting, they stop attending, meetings, they stop paying attention, they stop believing that their voice matters. And when responsible citizens withdraw, then the system, it doesn't stop operating. It keeps going on. It just becomes easier for louder, more extreme, less accountable voices to start dominating the space. Secondly, people become more vulnerable to misinformation when they start having that distrust, right? When people believe when people believe every official source is lying, every institution is corrupt, and every process is rigged, and then they often become willing to believe almost anything, as long as it confirms their anger or their suspicion. And that's incredibly dangerous. A republic depends on citizens who can argue from facts, not just from fear. Then, thirdly here, government loses legitimacy. Legitimacy means people may disagree with a decision, but still accept that the process had an authority to it. And that's really important and essential in a republic, because you can lose an election and still believe the election mattered. You can disagree with a court ruling and still accept that courts have a constitutional role. You can dislike a law and still recognize that it was passed through a lawful process. But when legitimacy collapses, people stop seeing opponents as fellow citizens. They start seeing them as more like enemies, and they stop seeing elections as contests to be won or lost. They start seeing them as a threat that must be stopped at any cost. And that's when civic disagreement becomes something more dangerous. Now, fourthly, public problems become harder to solve. Going back to the very first episode of this, government is not just an idea. It's how communities build roads and fund their schools and respond to disasters, run their elections, operate the courts, provide police and fire protection, maintain public health, and make decisions about shared needs. And when trust collapses, even the basic problem solving necessary becomes more difficult. People may reject good information. Officials may be unable to persuade the public. Citizens may assume every decision has some type of hidden motive within it. And then problems that require cooperation become nearly impossible to address. But here's the important part. Government also has a responsibility to earn public trust. Citizens should not be blamed for mistrusting institutions that act dishonestly or secretly or arrogantly or unfairly, because trust is not created by demanding loyalty. Trust is built through competence and transparency and fairness, accountability, honesty, and respect for the rule of law. When leaders lie, trust suffers. When officials abuse power, trust suffers. When institutions protect themselves instead of serving the public, trust suffers. When government treats citizens as problems to manage instead of people to serve, trust suffers. When people see one set of rules for the powerful and another set of rules for everyone else, trust suffers. That's why trust in government is not just a citizen problem. It's a leadership problem too. A republic needs citizens who are informed and engaged, but also needs institutions that are worthy of confidence. That does not mean government will always be popular. Doing the right thing is not always popular. Following the law is not always popular. Protecting rights is not always popular. Telling the truth is not always popular. But over time, trust depends on whether people believe government is lawful, accountable, and connected to the public that it serves. So the answer is not blind trust. And the answer is not permanent cynicism. The answer is responsible citizenship. Ask questions, demand evidence, vote, pay attention locally, hold your leaders accountable, care about the truth, learn about how the system works. Criticize the government when it deserves criticism, but do not give up on the idea that self-government requires participation. Because when people lose trust in government completely, they often lose trust in each other as well. And that may be the greater danger. Because a republic depends on more than laws and the institutions that make it up. It depends on the basic belief that we can still govern ourselves together even when we disagree. So what happens when people lose trust in government? Participation weakens, misinformation spreads, legitimacy suffers, problems become harder to solve, and citizens may begin to see one another as enemies instead of members of the same political community. But trust can be rebuilt, not through slogans and sound bites, and not through blind loyalty, and not by pretending that problems don't exist. Trust is rebuilt through honesty, accountability, competence, transparency, and citizens who refuse to confuse skepticism with surrender. The real civic question is not whether government deserves unlimited trust, because it does not. The real question is whether citizens and leaders can build enough trust for self-government to survive. And tonight, I thought that was a civics question that was worth asking. For my friends that hang around for these whole videos, here's the Cliff Notes version of this. I didn't get to it in the last one because it took 10 minutes to get through that video. But anyway, what happens to when people lose trust in the government? Well, it all comes down to the fact that a republic does not require blind trust in government. In fact, healthy skepticism is necessary. But when skepticism turns into total cynicism, participation weakens, misinformation spreads, legitimacy suffers, and citizens begin to see each other as enemies instead of members of the same political community. Unfortunately, as I've worked my way through this one, this one has been very telling. It seems very current, and hopefully we can all work together to understand that can be recognized and get back to that honest skepticism rather than being completely cynical of everything that's going on around us. All right. Anyway, so thanks for hanging around, and this was a fun one. Thanks a bunch. Bye.